Welcome to UBI Unplugged, breaking down the future of income. Today, we're diving into the fascinating intersection of universal basic income, digital nomadism, and the post-pandemic world. It's a complex web, but a really important one to unravel, right?
Important, yeah, maybe. But I still think UBI is, well, a pipe dream. Digital nomadism, sure, that's a thing. But UBI fueling it? I'm skeptical. Very skeptical.
I think skeptical is healthy, Otto. I'm a cautious optimist. The potential is definitely there, and the pandemic really highlighted the need for stronger safety nets. But the devil's always in the details. And there are a lot of details to consider.
Absolutely, and that's why we're here, right? To unpack those details. Let's start with the core idea, UBI as a foundation for location independence. Imagine a world where everyone has a basic income floor, allowing them to pursue remote work opportunities without the constant fear of financial ruin. That's the potential upside.
Okay, imagine. But where does the money come from? That's always the sticking point. And what happens when everyone suddenly wants to be a digital nomad? Who's going to do the essential jobs that keep society running? Are we all going to live on Instagram and influencer income?
Those are valid concerns, Otto. Funding mechanisms are critical. We're talking about potentially restructuring tax systems, exploring things like a progressive consumption tax, or even a land value tax. And you're right, not everyone can or wants to be a digital nomad. UBI isn't about forcing that lifestyle on people. It's about providing options, increasing bargaining power for workers, and fostering entrepreneurship.
Exactly. It's about freedom, the freedom to choose a job you're passionate about, the freedom to start a business, the freedom to say no to exploitative working conditions. UBI provides that leverage. And to Otto's point about essential jobs, UBI can actually increase the value and desirability of those roles. Think about it. If people have a basic safety net, they might be more willing to take on essential but lower paying jobs if they know they won't starve if things get tough.
Okay, but that assumes everyone's rational and makes responsible decisions. What about the people who would just blow it all on, well, questionable choices? Then they're right back where they started, only now the system is even more strained. And what about inflation? Wouldn't injecting all that extra money into the economy just drive up prices and make everything more expensive?
Those are the classic arguments, Otto, and they're important to address. Studies on UBI pilots have shown that people primarily use the money for basic needs, food, housing, healthcare. There's not a huge spike in frivolous spending. As for inflation, that's where careful policy design comes in. The UBI level needs to be calibrated to the overall economy, and ideally, it would be coupled with policies to address supply-side constraints and prevent price gouging. We also can't ignore the potential deflationary effects of automation, which UBI could help offset.
And consider the alternative, Otto. We're already seeing massive wealth inequality, stagnant wages, and increasing job insecurity. Automation is only going to exacerbate these problems. UBI isn't a magic bullet, but it's a proactive way to address these systemic issues before they spiral out of control. Think of it as an investment in human capital, a way to unlock potential and create a more resilient economy.
Resilient? Maybe. But what about the impact on local economies? If everyone's a digital nomad flitting around the globe, what happens to the places they leave behind? Small towns, rural communities? They're already struggling. Wouldn't this just accelerate their decline?
That's a really good point. It highlights the need for policies that support local economies and promote balanced regional development. UBI could actually help struggling communities by providing a base level of income for residents, allowing them to stay and invest in their local areas. But it needs to be coupled with investments in infrastructure, education, and job training to create sustainable opportunities. And thinking about digital nomads themselves, many are quite intentional about spending money in local communities. But there could be policies to support this further. Maybe tax incentives for spending with local businesses, or something along those lines.
And let's not forget the potential for digital nomads to bring skills, innovation, and investment to these communities. They can act as a catalyst for growth, sharing their knowledge and experiences with local entrepreneurs. We've seen that in places like Medellin, Colombia, or Chiang Mai, Thailand, places that have actively courted digital nomads and seen positive economic impacts. It's not a one-way street of exploitation. It can be a mutually beneficial relationship, but only with the right policies in place to protect both locals and the nomads themselves.
Okay, but what about taxes? If everyone's working remotely from different countries, who gets to tax them? How do you track income and enforce tax laws in a globalized world? It sounds like a logistical nightmare.
Taxation is a huge challenge, no doubt. We need international cooperation and new frameworks for taxing digital income. One possibility is a global minimum tax, which would prevent companies and individuals from shifting profits to low-tax jurisdictions. Another approach is to focus on consumption taxes, which are easier to collect regardless of where someone is working. We also need to think about residency rules and how they apply to digital nomads. It's a complex puzzle, but it's not insurmountable. We are seeing innovative ways in which countries are beginning to address this. For example, some are beginning to sell digital nomad visas, which allows tax and legal clarity around remote working within that country for a defined period.
And technology can play a role too. Blockchain technology, for example, could be used to track income and facilitate tax collection in a transparent and efficient way. The key is to embrace innovation and adapt our tax systems to the realities of the digital age. Otherwise, we're just leaving money on the table and creating opportunities for tax evasion. There's also a whole ethical conversation about where digital nomads should pay taxes. Is it where they earn their income, where they reside, or somewhere else entirely? These are questions we need to grapple with.
Ethical questions? Yeah, that's another can of worms. What about the impact on global social equity? If UBI allows people in wealthier countries to live comfortably as digital nomads in developing countries, are we just exacerbating existing inequalities? Are we creating a new form of colonialism where the rich get to exploit the resources and lower cost of living in poorer nations without contributing anything back?
That's a really important ethical concern, Otto. We need to be mindful of the potential for UBI to create a two-tiered system, where the wealthy can afford to live a life of leisure while others are left behind. That's why it's crucial to implement UBA in a way that benefits everyone, not just a select few. This means ensuring that UBA is funded fairly, that it's accessible to all citizens regardless of their location, and that it's coupled with policies to address global inequality, such as fair trade agreements and development aid. It also means thinking about how we can encourage digital nomads to contribute to the communities they visit, whether through volunteering, supporting local businesses, or paying taxes fairly.
And consider the potential for UBI to empower people in developing countries too. If they have a basic income floor, they might be more likely to start their own businesses, pursue education, or participate in local governance. It can be a tool for economic empowerment and social mobility, not just for wealthy digital nomads. We also need to challenge the assumption that digital nomads are inherently exploitative. Many are conscious of their impact and actively seek to support local communities. It's about fostering a sense of global citizenship and responsibility.
Global citizenship sounds nice, but how do you enforce that? How do you make sure people are actually contributing and not just taking advantage of the system? It all feels very idealistic and detached from the realities of human behavior.
It's not about enforcing global citizenship, Otto. It's about creating incentives and fostering a culture of responsibility. We can use tax policies to encourage responsible behavior, such as rewarding companies that invest in sustainable practices or penalizing those that exploit workers. We can also use education and awareness campaigns to promote ethical consumption and responsible travel. And ultimately, it comes down to individual choices. We need to encourage people to be mindful of their impact and to make choices that benefit both themselves and the communities they visit. It also relies on an ability of all governments to act fairly and ethically, of course.
Exactly. It's about shifting the narrative from exploitation to collaboration, from consumption to contribution. We need to create a world where digital nomadism is not just a lifestyle choice for the privileged few, but a force for positive change. And UBI can be a key enabler of that vision. But back to the news, I read a piece talking about how Trump voters are experiencing frustration and betrayal because campaign promises weren't kept. It highlights the need for direct economic support, like UBI, that addresses inequality and fosters a more robust society. If their economic policy is failing, what alternative solutions are possible that could bypass political dysfunction? I think UBI can be that solution.
I don't know if I buy that. It still feels like a band-aid solution. What about the logistics and the financing? The articles I've read skim over that part, and I'm skeptical that it can be maintained without negative consequences down the line. And the idea that voters are frustrated with Trump's policies reinforces my doubt that complex societal issues have easy solutions. It feels like chaos, with no rational solutions being offered. Where is the accountability?
I think it's too simplistic to call UBI a band-aid. It has the potential to address some pretty big issues, but it needs careful evaluation and policy adjustments. And you're right, there are a lot of broken promises out there that voters are clearly dissatisfied with. I read about mixed results of tariff rollbacks combined with potential inflationary pressures. It demonstrates how complex economics is and how crucial a nuanced approach is. But the potential for further inflationary pressures, the need for careful consideration, caution is definitely paramount.
Yes, but we need to be bold. A recent article highlighted the economic struggles faced by the Black community and some voters turning to Trump in response, now regretting that vote. It points to the systemic need to address economic disparity and to stop relying on ad hoc economic interventions. It can be a more direct and efficient approach to tackling these underlying issues. And on the flip side, the apparent erosion of Trump's support among those who initially backed him on economic grounds is telling. The policies haven't worked for them. How can we link it to existing inequalities? A deeper look at the economic concerns of those voters is crucial. If we don't address it, we're doomed to repeat it.
Maybe, but I see people touting UBI as a simple answer, and that's when my skepticism grows. If it's so straightforward, why hasn't it been successfully implemented anywhere? There are probably problems and failures that nobody wants to discuss. The lack of examples is a red flag. The Vox article about regretful Trump voters highlights a troubling trend of misplaced faith in political promises, and I wonder if the same thing is happening with UBI. Are people just trading one set of problems for another? I don't think so. I think they are just stuck.
Yeah, but we can learn from those experiences. There have been UBI pilots around the world, and while they haven't been perfect, they've provided valuable insights into the potential benefits and challenges. Look at the Stockton, California experiment, for instance, or the ongoing trials in Finland. These aren't necessarily perfect models, but they're a starting point for understanding how UBI can work in practice. And the voters have seen how all sorts of proposed solutions can fail. Take the rollbacks of tariffs, for instance. I read about that, and the way Trump is doing it could create complex and escalating problems, with potential for unintended consequences on inflation and international relations. The need for careful consideration is required for any policy that directly affects trade and supply chains.
Exactly. And that's why we need to be constantly evaluating and adapting our approach. UBI isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It needs to be tailored to the specific context of each country or community. But the underlying principle remains the same, providing a basic safety net for all, so that everyone has the opportunity to thrive in a rapidly changing world. There were some arrests of over 100 people recently in Tennessee in connection with the deportation plan and actions to potentially suspend habeas corpus. It raises concerns about civil liberties and potential targeting of marginalized communities. It supports the urgent need to implement a comprehensive UBI approach as a long-term solution to economic disparities.
Okay, so how would a UBI program address the economic vulnerability of immigrants in targeted cities, while considering potential conflicts with existing social safety nets? And how do you know that this mass arrest approach to deportation is a negative? Is that an assumption? Maybe we'd be better off without immigration, and that's how we increase the quality of living in the West. I think you are overlooking that point.
Well, the reported disproportionate impact of these immigration sweeps on communities of color in Nashville underscores the urgent need for more nuanced and equitable economic safety nets, particularly in areas with large immigrant populations. A UBI program could help stabilize these communities, mitigating the fear and instability caused by these raids, and providing a platform for long-term economic advancement. But these actions could lead to an increase of pressure on immigrants. And I don't trust that these stops were justified by driver behavior alone. There needs to be more transparency and evidence. How can we be sure this wasn't simply a pretext for targeting based on ethnicity or perceived immigration status?
These potential erosions of civil liberties and the potentially systematic targeting of marginalized communities support the urgent need to implement a comprehensive UBI approach as a long-term solution to economic disparities. A UBI would provide a safety net for vulnerable populations. The use of state and local law enforcement and immigration enforcement raises profound questions about the efficacy and ethics of such strategies. Is the focus on immigration enforcement diverting resources and attention from addressing the root causes of economic disparity? We really need to challenge those assumptions and think about broader solutions.
But it is a bold claim that Trump's tariffs aren't as effective. It might be true, but that's not how the world works. What does your crystal ball say? Nothing is that easy to say. I am far more worried about the potential erosion of civil liberties and the potential for targeting. I read about Mayor Baraka's arrest and the potential charges against other NJ Democrats. It raises the question of accountability. Is it political maneuvering or a criminal act? And Trump's potential suspension of habeas corpus is concerning. It feels like a power grab. How does that play into anything that we've discussed? How does that impact the potential for UBI and nomad lifestyles to prosper? I think a negative effect, but that's just a guess.
Those events, those arrests, are indeed concerning from a policy perspective. How can we ensure fairness and justice when those in power are accused of crimes? How can we apply appropriate checks and balances when there are threats to things like habeas corpus? How do these scenarios impede the policies needed to implement a UBI and make digital nomadism a reality? A lot of policies are needed, but it is concerning about the claims made by the Highway Patrol that arrests took dangerous elements off the street. Is this accurate? How is this being measured? The argument that the stops were justified by driver behavior alone needs more transparency. I want more information.
Right. There are more factors and information that need to be considered. The key is that it continues to erode trust in the authorities. I think people are just getting mad at the state, and that's not helpful. We need to focus on the systemic change and not the short-term issues. We need long-term comprehensive approaches, and people, let's face it, they're going to have difficulty being fair to the other sides of the conversation. Like the Gulf states dictating US foreign policy in the Middle East, that sounds cynical and potentially true. So there needs to be trust and fairness. It makes you wonder where the driving forces are behind each action, and the US may be just a paper tiger. If all that is true, it's hard to see UBI or digital nomadism ever taking off. I am more optimistic than that.
You're optimistic, I'm not. But I still question how you make people actually contribute and not just take advantage of the system. It all feels idealistic and detached from the realities of human behavior. I think the only realistic situation is that we are all doomed. There is no hope and things will collapse. And that may not be a bad thing. If the world collapses, then people will naturally sort things out, and we may actually come up with better solutions. So that's my version of optimism.
Okay, well, I think somewhere between your two views is the truth. It's not about enforcing global citizenship. It's about creating incentives and fostering a culture of responsibility. We can use tax policies to encourage responsible behavior, and we can also use education and awareness campaigns to promote ethical consumption and responsible travel. And ultimately, it comes down to individual choices. We need to encourage people to be mindful of their impact and to make choices that benefit both themselves and the communities they visit. And we can do this via policy adjustments. I think it's possible to have a UBI world that encourages digital nomadism, but that requires thoughtfulness to ensure it is successful.
All right, well, that is all the time we have today. Thanks for joining us for another episode of UBI Unplugged.